Your boss is probably not very good at the job. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying it because the evidence points that way. 82% of employees in Gallup surveys said their manager lacks solid leadership ability. 57% of workers have left a job specifically because of their boss, according to DDI research. Not because of the company, not because of the work, because of the person right above them. And here's the part people hate to admit. Your manager probably wasn't always bad at this. At one point, they were great at something. They were so good, actually, that somebody chose to promote them. And that promotion may have been the start of the problem. Back in 1969, a Canadian educator named Laurence J. published a book that was meant as satire. It was called The Peter Principle, and it introduced an idea that sounded ridiculous back then. The concept was simple. In a hierarchy, people tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. You begin in a role, you're good at it, so you move up. You put in the effort, you learn the new role, you become good at that too. Then what happens? Another promotion. The pattern keeps going. Competence earns promotion, which leads to a tougher job, which can lead to more competence if you manage it, which then leads to yet another promotion. Until one day, you end up in a role you cannot handle. The skills no longer carry over. The pressure becomes too intense. The work itself is totally different from anything you've done before, and that's where the promotions stop. Not because you reached the top of the org chart, but because you stopped performing well enough to justify going higher. And this is where it gets ugly. Once you hit that struggle point, you usually don't get fired. You just stay there. You become what Peter called a final placement. You spend the rest of your career stressed out, underperforming, and blocking people below you who might actually be good at the role. You're not winning. You're just not failing hard enough to get removed. You're simply stuck in a position that drains your energy while keeping the company from putting someone better in that seat. For 50 years, people treated this as a clever observation about bureaucracy, a joke for happy hour. But over the last decade, researchers started asking whether it was actually true, whether there was real data that could prove or disprove the Peter Principle. And what they found should change how you view every promotion you're ever offered. A major study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics looked at data from more than 200 firms, tracking nearly 39,000 sales employees to see what happened when top performers were promoted into management. Sales is a perfect place to test this because performance is measurable. You hit your number or you don't. There's no gray area around who performs well. The researchers found exactly what you would expect about who got promoted. The strongest predictor of whether a salesperson became a manager was their sales volume. Top performers moved up. Lower performers stayed where they were. The system was doing exactly what it was built to do. But then the researchers examined what happened to the teams those new managers inherited. And the results were brutal. The better someone was at selling, the worse they tended to be at managing. There was actually a negative correlation. The superstar sales reps, once promoted, led teams that performed worse than teams led by average sales reps who had been promoted. Not a little worse, clearly, materially worse. The researchers then looked into why. Selling is basically a lone wolf job. It rewards aggression, personal focus, self-reliance, and yes, a certain amount of selfishness. The best salespeople are often obsessed with their own numbers, their own pipeline, their own commission. That intensity is exactly what makes them great at sales. But management demands the opposite. Teamwork, patience, coaching, empathy, the ability to care more about someone else's win than your own. The traits that make you elite in one job can actively hurt you in the other. By promoting the best sellers, these companies were doing two things at once. They were taking their top revenue producers out of the field, and they were placing those same people into roles where they reduced the performance of everyone around them. That's a double hit to value. The study even found what actually predicted strong management. It was the salespeople who consistently collaborated on complex deals, helped teammates close tough accounts, and showed patience through longer sales cycles. Those collaborative reps didn't always post the flashiest individual numbers, so they rarely got promoted. The system couldn't see the skills that really mattered for the next role. And this pattern is not limited to sales. It shows up everywhere. Think about the brilliant software engineer who gets promoted to engineering manager. On paper, it sounds logical. They write cleaner code than anyone else. They solve architecture problems in their sleep. They're a technical beast. So of course the company wants to reward them, and they make them the boss. But the work of an engineering manager is not writing code. It's managing people. It's settling conflicts between developers. It's sitting through budget meetings and navigating politics with the product team. It's writing performance reviews and delivering difficult feedback. Those are soft skills. They require empathy, diplomacy, and a tolerance for admin work. A brilliant engineer may have zero talent for any of that. Suddenly, the company loses its best coder and gains an average manager. The team does worse because the leader can't coach or communicate well. The former star performer is miserable because they now spend 6 hours a day in meetings. And everybody acts like this was a smart move, because the alternative, admitting the promotion was a mistake, is too uncomfortable to say out loud. 60% of new managers fail within their first 24 months, according to research by CEB, now part of Gartner. 6 out of 10. And here's the crazy part. 70% of frontline managers say they never even saw the promotion coming. They didn't ask for it. They didn't prepare for it. Someone just tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations, you're running things now." 18% of those managers later say they regret taking the role. Another 41% say they have serious doubts about whether it was the right decision. So we have a system that promotes people based on skills that do not transfer into jobs they never asked for, where most of them fail, and where nearly 1 in 5 actively regrets saying yes. This is not a failure of individual workers. It's a structural flaw in how we think about careers. There's another layer here, and it comes from what statisticians call regression to the mean. To earn a promotion, you usually need a standout year. You need to crush your goals. You need to be visibly, unmistakably excellent. But performance in any given year is always some mix of skill and luck. To have a truly exceptional year, you probably had both. The skill was real, but so was a streak of good luck. Maybe the market was on fire. Maybe you landed a whale account. Maybe your biggest competitor went under. When you get promoted off that peak year, something very predictable happens. Your performance in the next period drifts back toward your actual average. The hot streak ends. The market cools off. The whale was a one-time win. You regress to the mean. But now you're in a harder job, with bigger expectations, and that natural statistical correction looks like incompetence to everybody watching. Most people imagine their career as a ladder. You start at the bottom and climb. Every rung is better than the one before it. The only worthwhile direction is up. You need to delete that picture from your head. It's dangerous. Instead, imagine a graph. The vertical axis is competence, meaning how good you actually are at your work, how comfortable you feel, how much value you create. The horizontal axis is job level, from entry-level roles on the left to senior leadership on the right. For most people, that line does not rise forever. It has a shape. At the entry level, your competence starts low, then climbs fast as you learn. At senior individual contributor, you hit your peak. The work fits the way your brain is wired. You feel confident. You go home satisfied. You're in what some people call your zone of genius. Then comes the move into management. The line begins to fall. You're not doing the work anymore. You're overseeing people who do the work. You're decent at it, maybe, but not excellent. The stress goes up. The satisfaction drops. Then comes director level. Now the job is mostly politics and strategy. Your competence line falls off a cliff. You're drowning. And the tragedy is that we celebrate when people enter this danger zone. We throw promotion parties. We update LinkedIn. We label it success. But in many cases, what we're really celebrating is the exact moment someone becomes bad at their job. Here's what financial advisors never tell you. Your expected utility, which is basically happiness plus money minus stress, does not rise in a straight line with job level. For the first few promotions, the money outweighs the stress. Utility rises. But eventually there's a tipping point. For a lot of people, that tipping point is senior individual contributor. Beyond that, the extra 20% in pay comes with a 50% increase in stress, a huge increase in meeting time, less time doing the work you actually enjoy, and a real chance of failing. That's negative expected value. A rational investor would never make that trade. Yet people make it in their careers all the time because they've been trained to believe that up is the only direction that counts. And here's something that surprises a lot of people. In many fields, especially tech, senior individual contributors now make as much as or more than their managerial counterparts. Staff engineers and principal engineers at major tech companies regularly earn $400,000 or more in total compensation. According to recent data, staff-level engineers at competitive companies make 15 to 25% more than engineering managers at the same level. They deal with less administrative overhead. They spend more time on high-impact technical work. They're less likely to burn out. And during layoffs, they're often safer, because they're the ones actually building the product. Middle managers get cut. The people doing the core technical work usually remain. So let's say you've looked at the numbers. You examine the promotion offer. You look at the tasks it would involve. You honestly evaluate your own skills and interests, and you realize it's a trap. It pushes you beyond your level of competence into a role that does not fit how you're wired. How do you turn it down without wrecking your career? You can't just say, "No thanks, I'd rather stay where I am." That makes it sound like you've quit on yourself. You have to reframe it. The first move is separating compensation from the role. Most people only want the promotion because they want the raise. They don't actually want the job, the meetings, the politics, the performance reviews, or the responsibility for other people's results. What they really want is the money attached to the title. If you can get the money without changing your function, that's the best possible outcome. The conversation needs to shift toward how you can create more value on your current track and be paid for that value. You want to push for what's often called a senior individual contributor path. This is becoming more common in tech, but it can be negotiated in almost any industry. The framing sounds something like this: "I'm genuinely honored by the offer, but I've looked carefully at where I drive the most return on investment for this company. And it's in doing the work itself, not managing people who do it. I want to double down on being the best specialist you have. Can we explore a path where I take on more complex projects, mentor junior team members, and get a compensation adjustment that reflects that value while staying in this core role?" You're framing your refusal as a commitment to excellence. You're not saying you're scared of responsibility. You're saying you know exactly where you create value and you want to maximize it. You're actually protecting the company from ending up with a bad manager, which is what many promoted people become. If they say no, if they tell you the only way to advance is to become a manager, that tells you something important about the organization. It means they don't understand value. It means they're still operating on an outdated 1950s assumption that career success comes in only one shape. And that may be a sign that it's time to look for a company that actually gets it. Here's what most people miss. Turning down a promotion can actually be a power move. It signals confidence. It says you know exactly what you're good at, and you're not chasing titles just to prove your worth. The people who lunge at every promotion often end up stressed, struggling, and replaceable. The person who stays in their zone of genius, who becomes absolutely elite at the core technical work, who everybody depends on because nobody else can do what they do, that person becomes nearly untouchable. And there's an even deeper psychological benefit that rarely gets discussed. When you're working at your level of competence, you experience what psychologists call flow more often. You're challenged enough to stay engaged, but not so overwhelmed that you live in constant anxiety. You sleep better. Your relationships outside of work get better because you're not dragging stress and frustration home every night. The compounding effect of sustained excellence in a role you're truly good at often creates more career opportunities than the person who accepted the promotion struggled for. Struggle gets tolerated only until it becomes impossible to ignore. Gallup's research found that low employee engagement costs the global economy $8.8 trillion a year. That's 9% of global GDP lost to dissatisfaction, disengagement, and dysfunction. A huge part of that dysfunction comes from people sitting in management roles they never should have accepted, leading teams they don't know how to lead, and making decisions they aren't qualified to make. The Peter Principle isn't just a catchy idea. The data supports it. The sales study shows the mechanism. Regression to the mean explains the statistics. The 60% failure rate of new managers confirms the outcome. If you blindly say yes to every opportunity, eventually you'll find yourself in a room you don't understand, doing work you hate, waiting either to burn out or get fired. The smartest person in the room isn't always the CEO. It's not always the director or the vice president. Sometimes the smartest person is the one who climbed to the exact level where they were happiest and most effective, then had the discipline to stop climbing. They maximize utility, not title. They optimize for satisfaction and impact, not for LinkedIn upgrades. That's how you actually win the career game. Because the goal isn't to reach the highest possible level. The goal is to find the level where you do your best work, where you feel most alive, where you create the most value, and where you go home at night without dreading the next morning. For some people, that's the C-suite. For most people, it isn't. And knowing the difference, having the self-awareness to recognize your zone of genius and the courage to stay there, that's the competitive advantage nobody talks about. The Peter Principle says you'll rise to your level of incompetence. But that only happens if you let the system make your decisions for you. If you take control, if you judge each opportunity by what it actually demands rather than the title attached to it, if you're honest with yourself about what you're good at and what would make you miserable, then you can break the pattern. You can become the person who knows exactly where they belong. And ironically, that clarity often leads to more success, more money, and more opportunity than the blind climbers ever reach. Because organizations eventually learn to value the people who are genuinely excellent over the people who are merely ambitious. The excellent ones may not hold the biggest titles, but they're the ones who actually keep everything running. The next time someone offers you a promotion, don't just feel flattered. Ask yourself the hard questions. Does this role fit my real skills? Will I enjoy the day-to-day work? Am I being promoted because I'm good at what I do now, or because I'd be good at what comes next? Those are two very different things. And if the honest answer is that you're being rewarded for excellence in a completely different game, if the skills that made you successful won't transfer to the new role, if you'd be trading mastery for mediocrity just to get a better title, then maybe the smartest thing you can do is say thank you, but no. Because staying where you're excellent isn't settling, it's strategy.